Sometimes, it seems like the most important days in your life don't announce themselves with a bang or a bright light. They sneak in quietly, folded among the most ordinary moments, disguised as nothing at all. That was exactly how it happened for me, a morning like any other. A shaft of pale light slipping through the blinds of my cramped Chicago apartment. The slow ticking of the radiator knocking somewhere in the walls. I had just come in from a shift at the precinct, still in uniform pants. Badge clipped to my waistband. My boots left a trail of salt on the mat by the door, evidence of another endless Midwest winter. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door, shrugged out of my jacket, and started the daily ritual of flipping through my mail, never expecting anything more than bills or pizza coupons. My building is nothing special, just another aging 3-story walk-up in Lincoln Square, full of artists, students, and tired nurses like me. I keep my place neat, a habit from years in the Army and on the force, but there's never been anything precious about it. The paint is peeling, the radiators cough in winter, and the landlord is slow to fix anything. But it's mine, bought with overtime and pension from both careers. Chicago outside my window is a constant hum, sirens, laughter, the L rattling by. I like the noise. It keeps the past at bay. So I wasn't expecting anything. I stood at my kitchen counter, mail stacked under my palm, and began the sorting: a power bill, a student loan payment, and a glossy flyer from a realtor promising your dream home in Evanston. I was about to toss the pile into the recycling when I saw the envelope. It was heavy, almost formal, the kind that usually contains holiday cards or legal documents. The address was written in looping, careful cursive, the handwriting of someone who had spent years perfecting her signature. My mother's handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere, even now. The return address stopped me. Mason family, 1539 Dogwood Lane, Charlottesville, VA. That single line was like opening an old wound one I'd done my best to keep stitched up since Dad's funeral 7 years ago. I stared at it for a moment, thumb hovering over the seal, heart thumping in my chest. Why now? Why, after so many years of silence, so many unanswered calls and ignored emails? I almost set it aside, but curiosity, or maybe just the old habit of following orders, made me open it. Inside, nestled in a layer of tissue paper, was a thick, gold-embossed card. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Jessica Mason and Oliver Carter, Saturday, April 20th, at the Rotunda in Charlottesville, Virginia. The letters shimmered under the light, elegant and impersonal. Beneath the card was a smaller envelope, addressed to me by name, containing a brief note in my mother's slanting hand. It would be nice if you could come. Try not to make it about you this time. That was it. No love, Mom, no hope you're well. Just a single line, heavy with implication, and a signature that seemed more like a period than a closing. I stared at the note, feeling something inside me twist. After all these years, after Dad's funeral, where my mother and Jessica had barely spoken to me, after years of being the family ghost, this was how I was summoned home: a wedding invitation. As if I were just another distant relative whose presence was optional. For a long time, I sat there on the edge of my sagging couch, invitation in one hand, the note in the other, feeling a strange sense of vertigo. I couldn't tell if I was angry or numb. My sister Jessica, the golden child, the one who had always seemed to move effortlessly through life, was getting married. And not just to anyone, to Oliver Carter. The name ricocheted around my skull for a second, the syllables thick with memory. Oliver Carter. Once a skinny army medic, now apparently my future brother-in-law. It was 8 years ago, in a place I sometimes still visit in my sleep, a dirt street in Ramadi, Iraq. Shrouded in heat and dust. My squad had been ambushed, pinned down by sniper fire, and Oliver, fresh out of training and scared to death, had frozen when his turn came to move. I'd grabbed him by the collar, pulled him out of the line of fire, and gotten both of us back to safety. I'd carried his gear, bandaged his wounds, and listened to him sob in the tent that night. Afterward, he'd promised me 1,000 times that he'd never forget. I guess he hadn't. But my own family seemed to have managed it easily enough. The next few days blurred together in a haze of old feelings and new anxiety. The invitation sat on my kitchen table, silent and accusatory, as I tried to decide what to do. My friends at work noticed my mood shift, detectives notice everything, and my poker face isn't what it used to be. My partner, Maria, asked if I was okay more than once. I just shrugged it off, saying I was tired or that the cold was getting to me. But inside, I was wrestling with the question that's dogged me all my life: do I show up? Or do I let them win by staying away? There was no right answer. My relationship with my family had always been complicated. Dad was the glue, a soft-spoken math professor who quietly championed my choice to join the army. Then the police force, over my mother's objections. When he died, the center could not hold. My mother and Jessica drifted together, and I drifted out, caught somewhere between pride and pain. Every call home turned into an argument. Every holiday visit ended with me leaving early, feeling smaller than when I arrived. The last time I saw them was at Dad's funeral. I'd worn my dress blues, trying to honor his memory, but all I got were sit-along glances and muttered comments about showing off. Jessica barely spoke to me, too busy comforting Mom or chatting with her college friends. When I left, nobody asked me to stay. I drove back to Chicago in silence, promising myself I was done chasing acceptance that would never come. But the invitation poked holes in my resolve. The past isn't as easy to leave behind as you'd hope. I found myself rehearsing arguments in the shower, composing imaginary letters in my head. What would I say to Jessica? To my mother? Would I even have a chance to speak, or would I be expected to blend in, quiet and invisible, while everyone else celebrated? Some nights, I'd look at my old uniform still hanging in the back of my closet, and remember the medals and commendations that meant so little at home. I thought about the life I'd built for myself: a good job, friends who felt like family, a city that accepted my scars without question. Did I need to go back? Was I still seeking approval from people who had made it clear I wasn't welcome? The days stretched into a week and the RSVP date loomed. I thought about calling Jessica, but every time I picked up the phone, my chest tightened. The last message I'd received from her was a single text on my birthday, 3 years ago: "Hope you're well." No follow-up, no calls since. I'd sent her a card for her last birthday, but I never got a reply. Our relationship was like a house abandoned in a storm, doors closed, windows shuttered, but still standing out of habit. I tried to tell myself I didn't care. I tried to believe that I could just toss the invitation, ignore the guilt, and move on with my life. But the truth is, I still cared. I still remember the way Jessica used to sneak into my room when we were kids, begging me to read her stories late at night. I remembered the summers we spent swimming at the quarry outside Charlottesville, our laughter echoing over the water. I remembered how proud my father looked the day I graduated from West Point, even as my mother pursed her lips and called it a waste of potential. All of those memories came rushing back, a mix of sweetness and pain that left me breathless. There's a loneliness that comes with being the outsider in your own family, a sense of being both present and invisible at the same time. I'd carried that weight for so long, I almost forgot what it felt like to hope for something different. So I did what I always do when I'm stuck. I made a list. Pros and cons. I scribbled it on the back of an envelope, sitting at my kitchen table with a mug of bitter coffee. Pros: maybe it's time to try again. Maybe Jessica wants to make peace. I'll get to see Oliver and maybe talk about the past. I can show them who I am now. Cons: Mom's note is a warning. Last time ended in disaster. Risk of humiliation in front of the whole family. Travel is expensive. The list didn't help much. The truth is, I already knew I was going. Curiosity, or maybe just stubbornness, was stronger than pride. I couldn't let the past have the last word, not again. So I went online, found a flight to Charlottesville for $347, expensive, but manageable with some overtime pay, and booked it for the week of the wedding. Packing was harder than I expected. I stared at my closet for a long time, debating what image I wanted to present. Did I bring my dress uniform? Was that making it about me, as my mother so kindly put it? In the end, I packed my best black suit, some heels I never wear, and a box of old photographs I thought Jessica might want. I tucked my medals in the bottom of my bag, just in case. The night before my flight, I walked through my apartment, making sure everything was in order. As if I were leaving for a deployment instead of a wedding, I fed my neighbor's cat, set the thermostat, and checked the locks twice. Old habits, impossible to break. I slept fitfully, my mind racing, with dreams of home, my father's voice, the smell of honeysuckle, Jessica's laughter. Morning came too soon, and the city was still dark and quiet. I called a cab, slung my bag over my shoulder, and looked around my apartment one last time. It was funny how a place that had once felt like exile now felt like safety. I wondered if Charlottesville would ever feel like home again. At the airport, I moved through security on autopilot, boots tapping on linoleum, badge tucked away in my wallet. I bought a black coffee at the gate, tried to read a book, but my mind kept drifting. I imagined what the wedding would be like: Jessica glowing in white, Oliver waiting at the altar, my mother orchestrating everything with military precision. Where would I fit into the picture? Would anyone even notice I was there? The flight was bumpy and the seat was cramped. I stared out the window as Chicago fell away beneath me, skyscrapers shrinking into a patchwork of lights. My mind wandered back over the years, trying to piece together how we had all ended up so far apart. Was it inevitable, or had we all made small choices that led us here? Landing in Charlottesville, I stepped into the humid air, heart pounding. The city looked the same as always: red brick buildings, students lounging on the steps of the university, the Blue Ridge Mountains hazy in the distance. My mother's house was just a short cab ride away, but I sat on a bench outside the terminal for a while, watching the world go by. I wasn't ready to face them just yet. As I sat there, I realized that this trip wasn't just about Jessica's wedding. It was about finding out whether I could forgive my family and myself for the years of silence. The wounds that never quite healed. I didn't know what I would find or what I would say. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was my chance to come home, not just to Charlottesville, but to myself. The drive from the airport wound through old, familiar streets, lined with cherry blossoms and sprawling green lawns. Each house perfectly trimmed, American flags flapping above wide, shaded porches. Charlottesville in spring was always like this, nature performing at full tilt. Every bush and flowerbed bursting with color. Yet I felt none of the warmth that the city was so famous for. As the taxi rounded the corner onto Dogwood Lane, my mother's house came into view, looking larger than I remembered, as if the years had allowed it to expand into the space left by my father's absence. The white paint gleamed, flowerbeds meticulously ranged around the stoop. Pink and purple hydrangeas blooming so thick I wondered how much she paid the landscapers to keep it all perfect. A new silver BMW sat in the driveway next to my father's old Ford, now faded and battered from years of neglect. I wondered who drove it now. The taxi slowed and I caught sight of my reflection in the window, pale, tense, not quite ready. I took a breath and climbed out, tipping the driver a $10 bill. The suitcase felt heavier than it should have as I wheeled it up the familiar stone path. For a heartbeat, I hesitated at the front door, hand poised above the bell, listening to laughter spilling out from inside, a chorus that felt both welcoming and foreign. Then I pressed the bell and braced myself. The door swung open and there she was, Ellen Mason, my mother, looking as carefully put together as ever, every hair in place, lips painted a determined shade of coral. Her eyes landed on me, flickering up and down as if cataloging each detail my plain black suit. The small rolling suitcase, the circles under my eyes. "You made it," she said, stepping aside but not quite opening her arms. Her voice had a practiced brightness that I remembered from years of PTA meetings and Sunday church. I told Jessica not to expect much, that was it. Not a word about the flight, my job, the years that had passed since our last real conversation. She took my suitcase and set it in the hall, her grip firm, her eyes already darting past me to the kitchen where the hum of conversation grew louder. The house smelled faintly of furniture polish and peonies. The air tinged with the sweet scent of nostalgia and a sharper edge of anxiety. Nothing in the entryway had changed: my father's old hat on the peg, the antique mirror, the faded runner underfoot, but everything felt different. As if I'd stepped onto a movie set built from my memories. Jessica appeared at the top of the stairs, her hair swept up in a cloud of golden curls, cheeks flushed with excitement. She was radiant, all eyes and laughter, trailing a cloud of white tulle from a dress fitting. For a split second, I saw the little sister who used to chase fireflies with me in the backyard. But the moment faded quickly. She descended the stairs with theatrical grace, stopping just close enough to squeeze my shoulder. "Hope you brought your medals," she murmured, voice low enough that only I could hear. "But remember, this is my day." Her smile was dazzling, meant for the audience gathered in the living room, but her eyes flickered with something harder: competitiveness, or maybe just the old sibling rivalry that never really dies. I gave her a quick hug, careful not to muss her hair or dress. "Wouldn't dream of stealing your thunder, Jess," I said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. The living room was crowded with people, relatives I recognized only vaguely, old neighbors and friends of Jessica's from college, all of them clustered around in pockets of small talk. I could feel their eyes flick to me, then away again, as if unsure how to place me in the family tableau. My mother moved through the room with practiced ease, introducing Jessica to a group of women in pastel dresses, her voice rising and falling like a conductor's baton. I stood awkwardly near the doorway, my hands tucked into the pockets of my suit jacket, scanning for a familiar face. A few cousins waved, hesitant, then returned to their conversations. One of my mother's friends, a woman with frosted hair and an expensive diamond ring, swooped in for a hug, her perfume cloying. "Alex, we haven't seen you since you were in uniform at your father's funeral. Are you still doing? What is it, police work now?" she asked, voice to loud, eyes searching my face for a story. "Yes, I'm with the Chicago PD now," I replied, keeping my tone even. "Detective," she nodded, distracted, already turning to tell the story to someone else. "She's in Chicago now." "Detective, did you hear?" The room barely rippled. My mother's lips pursed, a faint signal of disapproval. I tried to drift toward the kitchen, looking for a safe place to land, but even there, I felt out of place. Jessica's bridesmaids gathered around the island, giggling over a Pinterest board of wedding bouquets. My Aunt Joan handed me a glass of lukewarm Chardonnay, her voice as sharp as ever. "So, Alex, when are you going to settle down? Jessica says you're still single. Don't you want a family?" I took a sip, the wine sour in my mouth. "I have a pretty full life, Aunt Joan. My work keeps me busy," she sniffed, unimpressed. "Well, it's not too late, you know, there are plenty of men here in Virginia." I smiled politely and changed the subject, asking about her garden until she wandered off, bored. Each conversation was a variation on the same theme, polite curiosity edged with judgment. As if my accomplishments were impressive but somehow beside the point, the undercurrent was clear. Jessica was the success story, the daughter who did everything right. Across the room, my mother's voice rang out as she described the wedding plans to a neighbor, how Jessica had found the perfect dress, how Oliver's family was so respectable, how everything was coming together just as she'd always dreamed. My name never came up. I was the silent shadow at the edge of every story. I drifted to the window, looking out at the yard where Jessica and I used to play. The old tire swing still hung from the oak tree, though the rope was frayed and the seat splintered. For a moment, I remembered the way Dad used to push us higher and higher, his laughter echoing over the lawn. I missed him fiercely, a sudden ache in my chest. Then I caught sight of Oliver Carter standing near the porch with a group of groomsmen. He looked older than I remembered, broader, more confident, but there was a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. Our gazes met for a moment and he offered a brief, awkward nod before turning back to his friends. I wondered if he felt as out of place as I did. As the afternoon wore on, the house filled with more people, distant relatives from New Jersey, old family friends from my father's university days, a handful of Oliver's army buddies. The conversation grew louder, punctuated by bursts of laughter, the clink of glasses, and the hum of old stories being retold. Through it all, I felt like a ghost, drifting from room to room, never quite landing. Dinner was a rehearsal affair, catered, expensive, everything perfectly planned. I found my place card at the far end of the long table, squeezed between Aunt Linda, who smelled of mothballs, and Uncle Bob, who spent most of the meal lecturing me about his latest investment in cryptocurrencies. The center of the table was reserved for Jessica and Oliver, flanked by my mother and the bride's best friends. I caught snippets of their conversation: honeymoon plans in Paris, designer shoes, Oliver's new job in finance. My own life seemed distant, small by comparison. The meal was a blur of polite small talk and careful silences. When the wine was poured and the main course cleared, my mother stood and raised her glass for a toast. "To my children," she began, her voice ringing out across the table. "To Jessica, whose happiness means the world to me, and to the future she's building with Oliver." She paused, eyes glistening with tears. "Family is everything. I know your father would be so proud to see this day." The guests murmured their agreement, raising their glasses. I smiled tightly, waiting for my name, for any acknowledgement of my presence. But it never came. The toast ended, glasses clinked, and conversation resumed as if nothing had been missed. Aunt Linda patted my hand, her fingers cold and bony. "You know, dear, your mother worries about you. She just wants you to be happy." I forced a laugh. "I am happy, Aunt Linda. Just not in the way you all might expect." She looked unconvinced, but let it drop. I excused myself to the bathroom, needing a moment to breathe. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the harsh light. The lines around my eyes seemed deeper here, the uniform I wore every day suddenly feeling like a costume. When I returned, the party had moved outside, the backyard lit by strings of white lights. Tables set with tiny vases of violets and baby's breath. Jessica twirled in her rehearsal dress, the center of attention as always. Oliver hovered nearby, laughing politely with the groomsmen. My mother circulated among the guests, face tight with pride and anxiety. I found myself drawn to the edge of the patio, nursing another glass of wine, watching the celebration from a safe distance. The night air was cool, the scent of fresh cut grass and barbecue drifting on the breeze. For a moment, I let myself imagine what it would be like to belong here, to be welcomed back without question or hesitation. Instead, I listened to the familiar notes of exclusion, quiet jokes about my job, pointed comments about my single status, the subtle reminders that I was not the daughter my mother had hoped for. Even Jessica's laughter, bright and clear, seemed to carry an edge of competition. "You'll always be the hero, Alex," she said at one point, sidling up to me near the grill. "Just try not to outshine the bride this weekend, okay?" I smiled, keeping my voice light. "Wouldn't dream of it, Jess. This is your show." But beneath the banter, I felt the old wounds reopening, the ache of never quite measuring up. The night stretched on, laughter and music mingling in the darkness. I watched as Jessica and Oliver danced together, the guests snapping photos, my mother beaming with pride. I wondered if any of them saw me at all. After most of the guests had left, I lingered on the porch, looking out at the moonlit yard. The tire swing creaked softly in the breeze, shadows stretching across the lawn. I thought about the promise Oliver had made to me in that hospital in Iraq, about always having my back, about never forgetting what I'd done for him. But here, among the people who should have mattered most, I felt more alone than ever. Inside, I could hear my mother and Jessica laughing in the kitchen, the clatter of dishes, and the low hum of voices. I wondered if I should join them, try to bridge the gap. But the weight of old grievances held me back. I was tired of being the outsider, the problem to be solved, the daughter who never quite fit. That night, I lay awake in the narrow guest bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks and sighs of the house settling around me. I thought about Dad, how he would have known what to say, how he would have found a way to bring us together. I missed him more than ever, his quiet wisdom, his unshakable faith in me. As sleep finally claimed me, I promised myself that tomorrow I would try. For Jessica, for Oliver, for the family we once were. But I knew, deep down, that some things can't be fixed with a smile or a toast. Some wounds never really heal. I woke early on the morning of the wedding. Before the sun had crested the blue ridge on the horizon, the house was silent, save for the sound of birds outside and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. For a while, I lay there, cocooned in the guest bed's floral sheets, watching the play of light and shadow on the ceiling. I tried to steel myself for the day ahead, but already a familiar knot of anxiety had begun to form in my stomach. I replayed the events of the rehearsal dinner, the parade of polite dismissals. The way my name had hovered in the air, unspoken, unnecessary. I had come hoping for some small crack in the ice, but the coldness between us seemed only to deepen. By 8, the house had exploded into activity. Jessica's laughter drifted from the master bedroom, where her bridesmaids flitted like colorful birds, curling hair and fastening jewelry, shrieking with excitement at every detail. My mother's voice rang out, sharp with purpose, directing caterers and photographers. I made coffee and slipped outside to the back porch, letting the morning air clear my head. From there, I watched the wedding tent rise in the yard, billows of white linen, rows of folding chairs, tables set with blue and silver ribbons, everything immaculate, orchestrated, expensive. No one noticed my absence until my mother swept through the kitchen in a cloud of perfume and panic. Phone pressed to her ear. "Alexandra, where are you? Please try to look presentable. Jessica wants pictures at 10. And you know how important this is for her." Her eyes skimmed over my jeans and sweater, and, "Please don't wear your boots today." I nodded, biting back a retort, and escaped upstairs to dress. I slipped into my best black suit, crisp white shirt, and a pair of modest black heels. For a moment, I hesitated over the medals I had packed, my army commendations, the small silver star that had earned me 2 lines in the local paper and a lifetime of silence at home. In the end, I left them in my bag. This wasn't my day. Downstairs, I waited in the hallway while Jessica and her bridesmaids posed for photos on the staircase. My mother fussed over every curl and fold of Jessica's dress, all motherly pride and gentle coos. When the photographer suggested a photo of the sisters, Jessica obliged. But as we stood side by side, her grip tightened on my waist. "Just smile, Alex," she whispered, her tone laced with warning. "Don't ruin this." The photographer snapped a dozen shots, then moved on, directing the bridal party outside. I slipped away, unnoticed, back to the kitchen. There, I found Oliver nervously adjusting his tie. He looked up, startled to see me. "Alex," he said, voice low, "you look good. I'm glad you came." There was a pause to breathe for anything honest. I thought about the promises made years ago, the things left unsaid. "Wouldn't have missed it," I said, lying easily. He nodded, but didn't linger. Within minutes, he was gone, swept away by his groomsmen. I watched him go, feeling more alone than ever. The morning blurred into a series of small indignities and careful exclusions. I was not asked to help with hair or makeup. My name wasn't on the wedding itinerary, nor was I listed as part of the bridal party, despite being Jessica's only sibling. My mother kept me busy with errands: move this box, find this guest, check on the caterers. Every time I passed through the living room, someone would ask me to take a photo, hand out a program, or run outside for another folding chair. I did as I was told, eager to keep busy, trying not to mind how easily I slipped into the role of hired help. The guests arrived in waves, dressed in shades of navy and champagne, all of them radiant, perfumed, and chattering. The Mason family, my family, gathered at the front, exchanging hugs and stories, passing around old photos. Jessica floated among them, flawless in her dress, her arm looped through my mother's. I hovered at the edges, catching snippets of conversations that barely included me. "Chicago's so far. You must be so proud of Jessica. I heard her sister was in the army. What's that like?" It was as if I were a curiosity, something to be discussed in passing but never addressed directly. A living rumor. Now and then, one of Oliver's friends, recognizable by the sharp creases in their suits and the unmistakable posture of former soldiers, would catch my eye, nod politely, but few approached. The distance between us was almost physical, a gulf I didn't know how to cross. At noon, the ceremony began. The guests took their seats under the billowing white tent, the string quartet's music floating on the warm spring air. I found my place at the very back, next to the kitchen doors, close enough to smell the trays of hors d'oeuvres and hear the clatter of the catering staff. I scanned the program, looking for my name. It wasn't there, not as family, not as military, not as anyone. Jessica glided down the aisle on my mother's arm, radiant in her dress, her smile wide and perfect for the cameras. The guests turned as one, craning to catch a glimpse of her. Oliver waited at the altar, stiff and nervous. The ceremony was short, full of carefully chosen readings and vows, every word rehearsed. I watched as my mother wiped away tears, as Jessica and Oliver exchanged rings, as the minister declared them husband and wife. The applause rose, the music swelled, and I sat frozen at the back, unsure whether to stand or clap. No one turned to look at me. I could have been invisible. After the ceremony, the guests spilled into the garden for cocktails and photos. I stood to one side, watching as Jessica and Oliver posed with family and friends. My mother directed every shot, making sure the right people were in the right places. Let's get a photo of the Masons. And now, just the newlyweds. When it was time for a family photo, I was summoned, placed on the edge of the group, half in shadow. I smiled for the camera, aware that I would be cropped out of the frame as soon as the pictures were printed. The reception was held in a grand ballroom at a nearby hotel. All white tablecloths and crystal glasses, silver flatware glinting in the afternoon sun. I searched for my name on the seating chart and found it, tucked at a table near the kitchen doors. Between two distant cousins I barely remembered. The main table, reserved for the bridal party and immediate family, was out of reach. I watched as Jessica and my mother took their seats at the center, ringed by Oliver's family and their friends. Dinner was a parade of delicately plated courses: salmon with dill, steak with red wine sauce. Tiny vegetables ranged like jewels. My cousins made small talk about their jobs in Boston and Philadelphia, pausing occasionally to ask about Chicago, about what it's like being a police officer these days. And, "Do you miss real family?" I answered politely, careful not to say too much, aware of the curiosity behind every question. Every so often, a guest would stop by the table with a half-hearted joke or a well-meaning jab. "So you're the hero, huh? Heard you're the tough one in the family. Bet you've seen some things." I smiled, nodded, deflected, and was used to playing this part. The war was always a topic, never a conversation, something to be admired or pitied, never understood. More than once, my mother walked by, pausing only long enough to remind me to smile more or try not to draw attention. Jessica, too, found opportunities to remind me whose day it was. "Don't make people uncomfortable, Alex." Not everyone wants to talk about the army. As the night wore on, the room buzzed with laughter and music. Toasts were made, Jessica's college roommate telling stories of their wild years at UVA, Oliver's father describing the moment he realized his son had found the one. Each speech was met with applause, glasses clinking, tears and cheers. Then, finally, Oliver stood up. The room fell quiet, all eyes on the groom. He held his glass steady, his voice calm but carrying. "There's someone here I need to thank," he began, scanning the crowd. "Someone who made it possible for me to stand here today, marrying the woman I love." I felt the eyes turn, a slow ripple of attention moving in my direction. My heart thudded in my chest. He continued, voice steady. "A lot of you know I served in the army. What most of you don't know is that I wouldn't be here if it weren't for Jessica's sister, Captain Alexandra Mason. In 2016, in a place none of us wants to remember, Alex pulled me out of a firefight. She didn't hesitate. She didn't think of herself. She just acted. She saved my life. She never asked for thanks, and honestly, most of us didn't give her any. She taught me what courage looks like, not just in combat, but in coming home and being true to yourself, even when it's hardest." He paused, and the room was utterly silent, every guest caught in the gravity of his words. "So if you're raising a glass tonight, raise it to Alex. I wouldn't be here without her." He lifted his glass in my direction, and slowly, uncertainly at first, the room followed. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then one of Oliver's old army friends stood, clapping. Another followed. Then another, until half the room was on its feet, applause rising in a wave that seemed to echo through every year I'd spent feeling invisible. I met Oliver's gaze across the room, honest, grateful. The way he'd looked at me in that hospital tent so long ago. I tried to smile, swallowing the lump in my throat. I saw my mother's face freeze, her eyes wide with surprise. Jessica's jaw clenched, her hands tight around her champagne glass. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen, not as a curiosity, not as a burden or a warning, but as myself. The applause faded, replaced by a low hum of whispers and glances. Some guests looked away, embarrassed, others smiled at me, hesitant, unsure of what to say. After the speeches, people approached me differently. A few veterans sought me out, shaking my hand, offering quiet thanks. A woman from Oliver's side hugged me, tears in her eyes, her son's photograph on her phone. One of my cousins, eyes shining, whispered, "We had no idea, for once, my story wasn't something to be sidestepped or minimized." As the evening wound down, I wandered outside, escaping the press of the ballroom. The night air was cool, scented with gardenia. I breathed deep, my chest lighter than it had been in years. Inside, the celebration continued: dancing, cake, 1,000 photographs. But I didn't feel the need to perform anymore. I had my moment, and it was enough. I stood in the moonlight, watching my family through the windows, knowing that something fundamental had shifted. Maybe it was only for a night, maybe it wouldn't last, but for once, I was more than the story they told about me. And in that quiet, I realized I was finally ready to tell my own. The wedding party thinned out slowly, in the way that all big family events do: first the distant cousins, then the aunts and uncles with early flights, and finally the close friends who linger until the lights dim and the last song echoes through the emptying ballroom. I stood near the back exit, watching the cleanup crew begin their quiet work, collecting crumpled napkins and half-empty glasses, sweeping up a scattering of rice and confetti. I felt strangely calm. I hadn't danced, not really, and I hadn't stayed for the last toast. Yet for the first time in years, I wasn't desperate to leave. I leaned against the cool stone wall and let the night breeze wash over me. It was in this moment of quiet that my mother found me, her heels clicking across the tiles. Her lipstick was faded and her hair had come loose from its careful arrangement. Still, her posture was as rigid as ever. She stopped a few feet away, folding her arms, looking everywhere but at me. Jessica trailed behind her, her wedding dress now draped with a silk shawl, face blotchy from tears I hadn't seen. The three of us stood in a loose triangle, the tension in the air almost electric. My mother spoke first, her voice clipped, almost formal. "We always did our best, Alex." She didn't sound certain, and her words hung between us like a shield. "You think it was easy for us. With you gone so much, your father, he encouraged you, but he never understood how hard it was for the rest of us. I tried to hold this family together." Jessica's voice, sharper and more brittle than I'd ever heard, followed quickly. "You were always the favorite, Dad's little soldier. Even when you were gone, everyone talked about you like you were a hero. You left me with everything. Mom, Dad, the house, the pressure. Nobody ever asked what it was like for me." I felt 100 memories swirl between us: Christmas mornings when I came home in uniform, Dad's proud smile, my mother's tense silence, Jessica's resentment simmering behind her polite questions. How many times had I tried to bridge that gap, to share the world I lived in, only to find the door closing every time I reached for the handle? I shook my head, more tired than angry. "All I ever wanted was to come home and feel like I belonged," I said. "But I won't apologize for what I did or who I am. I never asked to be the favorite. I never wanted to make you feel small, Jess. I just wanted you to see me, not the uniform, not the medals. Me." There was silence, then a long, aching pause. I saw my mother's eyes glisten in the dim light, but her mouth stayed pressed in a hard line. Jessica stared down at her shoes, twisting the ring on her finger. I realized, in that quiet, that there would be no cathartic breakthrough, no sudden understanding. We were three women, bound by blood and history, each carrying wounds the others couldn't see. I felt something shift inside me, a letting go of hope that things might one day be easy between us. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I returned to the guest room and lay awake, listening to the house settle around me. I heard Jessica crying down the hall and wondered if she was mourning what we never had, or simply grieving the end of a perfect day. My mother moved from room to room, her footsteps soft on the carpet, unable to sleep. I stared at the ceiling, running through every conversation, every slight, trying to decide what I could have done differently. But deep down, I knew that nothing would ever truly be enough for them, and that was no longer my burden to carry. Dawn came early, a pale light spilling over the fields beyond the window. I packed quietly. Folding my suit and tucking away the medals I'd never worn, I left a note on the kitchen table. Simple and true: "Thank you for having me. Congratulations, Jess. I hope you find happiness." No anger, no accusation, just a clean goodbye. Outside, the world felt bigger and brighter than it had in days. I called a taxi and waited on the porch, suitcase by my feet. As we drove away, I watched my mother's house shrink in the rearview mirror until it disappeared behind the spring trees. I expected to feel hollow, but instead I felt lighter, as if the act of leaving was its kind of healing. At the airport, my phone buzzed with notifications. Messages from old army friends saw the video. "Proud of you," Cap News alerts pinged, "Groom thanks soldier sister-in-law in viral wedding speech." By the time I landed in Chicago, my inbox was full of requests from local reporters, veterans groups, and strangers who had seen Oliver's words on social media for years. I had tried to keep my service private, letting my actions speak for themselves. Now, suddenly, my story was public property. At first, I wanted to retreat, to shut off my phone, pull the curtains, hide from the noise. But as the days passed, the messages kept coming. Some were simple thank yous, some shared their own stories of estrangement and longing for home. Others asked for advice: how to talk to families who didn't understand, how to forgive when forgiveness felt impossible. One message stood out. It was from a young woman in Indiana, herself an Army vet, who wrote, "I saw the video from your sister's wedding. My family hasn't spoken to me since my first deployment. Watching you stand up there, hearing your story, it made me feel less alone. Thank you for not hiding. Thank you for showing us it's okay to keep going, even when your family doesn't get it." Her words echoed in my head for days. I thought about the men and women I'd served with, how many of them had gone home to find the doors closed, the welcome lukewarm, the distance insurmountable. I thought about the hollow ache I'd carried for years, waiting for a reconciliation that would never come. Maybe, I thought, it was time to stop waiting for the family I'd always wanted, and start building the family I needed. So I began to write back. To everyone. I started small, an email here, a phone call there. I set up a website. Just a simple page with my story and an invitation. If you've ever felt like you didn't belong, you're not alone. I called it Homecoming Truth, a name that felt both hopeful and honest. Within a week, I had messages from veterans across the country. Within a month, donations started arriving: $10 from a retiree in Vermont, $50 from a mother in Ohio, a check for $500 from a Marine Corps spouse in New York. Tens of thousands of dollars poured in, enough to register as a nonprofit, to start funding support groups and crisis counseling. The foundation became my new mission. I met with advocates and lawmakers in Springfield, then in Washington, speaking at town halls and veteran centers. I lobbied for policy changes, expanded mental health support for service members dealing with family estrangement, workplace protections for veterans facing discrimination, funding for community programs that built bridges where families had failed. My days were long, my calendar full, but for the first time in my life, I felt useful in a way that went beyond medals or promotions. I still missed my father, missed the idea of a family that could celebrate my victories without turning them into competitions or wounds. But my definition of family began to change. I met a retired Air Force captain who became a friend and mentor, a Marine who invited me to her wedding, and a Coast Guard veteran who called every Sunday just to check in. My network grew, a web of people who understood the complicated truth of service and sacrifice. We laughed together, mourned together, showed up for one another in ways our own families sometimes couldn't. It wasn't always easy. There were still nights when I lay awake, replaying old arguments, wishing things could have been different. But gradually, the anger faded. In its place grew a fierce sense of pride, not in what I had survived, but in what I had chosen to build. One morning, a few months after the wedding, I found myself standing at the edge of Lake Michigan, the city skyline silver in the dawn. I sipped my coffee, watched the joggers and dog walkers and early morning fishermen. Chicago had become my home in a way Charlottesville never was, a place that accepted my flaws, my history, my need for both solitude and connection. I thought about the years I'd spent chasing approval from people who could never give it, the way I'd measured my worth by invitations to family dinners and Christmas cards. I thought about the hundreds of letters I'd received from strangers, each one a reminder that belonging isn't something you're handed, it's something you create, day by day. Sometimes I still see Jessica's wedding in my dreams, the applause, Oliver's speech, the stunned silence that followed. I wonder if my mother ever watched the video, if she understood the truth of what was said. We speak occasionally now, brief, polite exchanges about the weather, her garden. News from Charlottesville. There is no anger anymore, just a kind of resigned distance. Jessica and I are cordial, sending birthday texts, the occasional photo of her new house. I wish her well. I hope she's found peace. But I don't go home for holidays anymore. My home is here, among the people who chose me and whom I chose in return. I spend Thanksgiving volunteering at the VA and Christmas hosting a potluck for veterans whose families are far away or gone. My apartment is always open, a place where laughter rings louder than judgment, where no one is asked to apologize for who they are. I think sometimes about forgiveness not as a gift to those who hurt me, but as a way to let myself move forward. I forgive my mother for her fear, Jessica for her jealousy, and myself for the years I wasted hoping for things I couldn't have. I carry the lessons with me, but I no longer let them define me. The foundation continues to grow. We lobby for better laws, fund college scholarships for the children of estranged veterans, and run retreats in the mountains of Colorado and the woods of Vermont. Each time I stand in front of a room full of men and women who have known the pain of coming home to silence, I tell them the same thing: you are enough. You belong. Your story matters. As I watch the sun rise over Lake Michigan, gold light rippling across the water, I think about the life I've built, not perfect, not simple, but real. My worth is no longer measured by who remembers my birthday or who invites me to dinner. It's measured by the lives I help change, the voices I help lift, and the sense of belonging I help others find. In the end, I did not find peace by returning to those who once rejected me. I found peace by living honestly, helping others, and refusing to let old wounds dictate the boundaries of my life. I found a new family, one made of truth, service, and people who see me for who I am. And that, finally, is enough.